very nice to have you here, Jon.
Well, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks. To begin with, maybe you could say a few things about yourself and what you're doing, so that the listeners that haven't read your books can get a picture of who you are and what you're doing.
Sure. I'm a psychotherapist. I work in Washington, D.C. And at this point in my career, I still do a little psychotherapy, but mostly what I do is teaching and supervision.
Yeah.
So I have training groups that I do in the United States and then in Europe and in India and Australia. And so the bulk of what I do these days is really teaching and supervision of therapists. And then I also do some research where we look at things we can do that would help therapists become more effective.
All right.
So those are the main activities I have. Plus, I write the books you mentioned, and I also have a Facebook post where I answer therapist questions every week to kind of help them with their patients.
All right. That's very nice.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah, it's facebook.com/dynamicpsychotherapy.com.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yep, so I answer, so when therapists have general questions about therapy, or like questions you'll ask today, or if they have questions about a patient, about twice a week, I'll do a little post that tells them how to work with that patient or how to understand certain questions we have in therapy and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and that's great. I have had much use of your posts.
Oh, great.
So I can really recommend those to the audience and to the listeners.
Oh, thanks.
And maybe we could begin with because we have some. We're really interested in your own personal development and career.
Sure.
And how was it for you when you were a beginning therapist? What did you struggle with, and what strengths did you have? Maybe you could say a few things.
Sure. Well, maybe the place to start really is when I was 6, I started working in my father's blacksmith shop.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so from the time I was 6 until I was 21, I was being trained to be a blacksmith. I was supposed to take over my dad's shop. So in learning to do a craft, my dad would show me how to do things. He would do it, I'd watch, and then I would do it. So I might be working at the anvil, and he'd say, no, that's wrong. Once again, watch me. So I'd do it again. Now do it again. Not quite right. Once again, watch me. Now you got it. So it was basically, he would always show me, and then I would do. Show and do, show and do. And so there was this element of watching someone who could do something and then learning from someone. So that was my model, how you learned. Later, it turned out I was very talented in music, so I became a professional French horn player. So my first career actually was as a professional musician.
Mm-hmm.
So when I went to university, it was as a musician, and then I became a professional musician. And there, when you're playing for your teacher will be very, very specific about what you need to do in the third bar on the third note, and it was a little sharp, it needs to be this and that. And so it was very, very specific technical advice all the time. And the training is also very structured in music. Over the past several hundred years, musicians have figured out what are the key skills you need on every instrument. And so you have a series of exercises, and you work through them every week. And like in the French horn, there were like several classic books you go. There's one series where it's 6 books, and you just go through 1, 2, 3. It's very structured. The first book, of course, is like super easy, and then the last one takes you up to the level where you'd be a virtuoso. So they had a very clear idea of what the skills were you needed to learn, and you practiced them in a very specific, stepwise manner that would take years to master. But at least you had a clear sense of what skills you needed to develop, and when you could play one piece, then you would have another piece just slightly more difficult. And so university training, same thing. There'd be a list of the etudes and pieces that you'd be working on, that there'd be somewhat easier pieces initially, but then by the end, you'd be working on the most difficult pieces.
Yeah.
So again, the training was very specific. You'd be learning all kinds of things about your fingerings. You'd be learning things about the placement of your mouth, of your lips. You'd be learning things about the rhythm. You'd be learning, like, you could be playing a particular note, and it would, if it was a third of the chord, that it would have to be somewhat lower if you're going to be in tune with your orchestra. It was a fifth of the chord, have to be slightly higher to be in tune with the orchestra. So you're learning just an enormous amount of detail, and my case, my intonation to be checked with a machine. They'd be checking how in tune I was, right?
Yeah.
So it was just like very, very specific.
Yeah.
So then I had this chance to become a therapist, which had been kind of a dream I'd had from high school, and so I went back to training and went and got a graduate degree so I could be a therapist. But it was a little bit of a problem. So I had my first week in graduate school, and I come to the teacher because my first placement is going to be working with psychotic patients who just got out of a mental hospital. And I said, but I've never done therapy before, and I've never worked with psychotic patients before. How am I going to do this? And she said, well, if your social skills have taken you this far, they'll take you through that too. Except that my social skills had never prepared me on how to deal with a patient who was hallucinating the devil in the office. No.
Not many have.
Maybe a lack in social skills that I had, but for some reason didn't quite work. So, and I was really struck how oftentimes I'd be really worried, like this patient's suicidal, or they're wanting to kill themselves, really serious problems. And I'd hear things like, well, you just need to let the relationship develop, or you have to earn the patient's trust, or these things take time. In other words, I was offered generalities in terms of really specific advice, and I wanted to become skilled, but I couldn't figure out how to do it. What were the skills? And then I was wondering, how do people even work in therapy? I'd had my own therapy, but it wasn't telling me how to work with a psychotic patient. It wasn't telling me how to work with, So what do people do? And then I was reading these therapy books, and they never had transcripts. So they would talk about a skill, but you wouldn't see the skill in the book. And I thought, this is odd, because, if you go to a CD store to get some music, it's like thousands of CDs of actual performances, right?
Yeah.
Well, what if the music profession was like therapy? You'd go to a CD store, and it'd be thousands of CDs of people talking about concerts they heard.
Yeah.
But you actually wouldn't see
That
Yeah, it's very crazy. I mean, it's
but that's
another way to learn. Yeah.
But it helps you see our field is crazy. I mean, it's just crazy that you're supposed to learn without ever seeing what people actually do.
Yeah. That's what I like about some of your books, because a lot of a big part of the books are in dialogue form, so that you can really read what do the therapist say and what do the patient answer, and
I think that just like I would watch my father and then learn by watching, or I had found a few therapists where I could see a videotape so I could learn by watching. It's just like, why isn't this typical in therapy? Why don't we see this? And I realized that like in music, the quality of musical performance increased dramatically in the 20th century. Why? Recordings. Yeah, they could hear really great performances. So no matter where you're in the world, if you didn't have Enrico Caruso to listen to as a tenor, you could have the music in front of you and hear what one of the great people did when he had that music and what it sounded like, right? And so also, like in chess, like the quality of chess playing exploded in the late 20th century. Why? Well, they finally had a theory of chess playing, but also there's this guy, Laszlo Polgar, and he said, gee, in chess, you have a lot of problems that come up. You have to know, how would I move a piece that would be good? And he says, well, I should write a book of 5,000 of the most common problems you run into in chess. And then everybody who works through that book of 5,000 problems, they'll know how to deal with them, and they'll build these skills, and they'll build their visual memory, and they'll build this and this. And so then through a very systematic way of skill building, and then through computer programs, skill building and the skills of chess players exploded. in psychotherapy, we don't even have an agreement of what skills therapists need.
Yeah.
Right? It's kind of wild.
Yeah.
So here I am. People are finding me difficult to supervise because I want to know what to do, what I should say.
Yeah.
Oh,
Obviously.
you're too active, or you're too this. And then luckily, one day, a supervisor said, "Well, Jon, you worry too much about technique. You have to remember that therapy is an art."
Oh.
Oh, now they could have gotten away with that with a lot of people.
Yeah.
But since that night, I was playing a Mahler symphony with the National Symphony Orchestra in Washington, D.C., it stands to reason I knew a little bit about art, just a bit.
Yeah.
And I realized this guy has no idea about what goes on in art. I realized he's one of those people that thinks that if you have a circle of people sitting around bongo drums in the park, that somehow that's great music. You know, and I realized, wow, he has no idea the amount of technical advice, specific skills, direct, deliberate practice, and you know, and the thought that goes into supervising and teaching in music. I realized he just has no idea, none. And then I realized I'm in trouble. You know, because I'm in a field where people are not teaching therapists how to be more effective. So that was the day I decided I want to one day learn to teach therapy as well as my music teachers teach music.
Yeah.
That was the day. That was a turning point for me. Now, it still took a long time to develop those skills and so on because I was going through, and I had years and years of supervision, but I had to really work hard to find people who'd actually say what they would say. They'd speak in generalities, but they wouldn't. They might say, "Well, you need to address the transference." Okay, so well, what do you do when you do it?
Yeah, how do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you say that? What would you say to this patient? And they would speak in generalities, but they'd never say what they would say. Like, you would never get away with that in music. If I didn't understand how to play something, my teacher would pick up his instrument and he'd play it. And he says, "Oh, now I get it." But people wouldn't do that in therapy. And that was the reason I wrote my first therapy book. What you may not realize, at the time I wrote my first therapy book, I was chair of the psychotherapy training program at the Washington School of Psychiatry. And I realized we had people that were coming out of our psychotherapy training program. They didn't know how to do defense analysis. They didn't know how to do transference analysis. I mean, these are the two foundational things you need to know if you're doing psychoanalytic psychotherapy. But I realized everyone was reading theory, and they knew theory, but they weren't learning how to put it into practice. You know, theory does no good. It does absolutely no good if it doesn't have a practical application. And so we were having all these classes, and students are reading these books, and they'd intellectualize about patients. Oh, and this gets me to another thing that bothers me about psychotherapy training. So I was taking this dream course, right? The analysis of dreams. Well, like you, I want to learn how to analyze dreams. That's a good skill to have as a therapist. So what do? Student would report a dream this patient had, and then the teacher would ask everybody to free associate to the dream. And then talk about what they thought the dream was about. So that's actually not what Freud recommends, by the way. But basically, we weren't taught how to analyze a dream. Yeah. We were taught how to project.
Yeah.
You know, make stuff up. So a lot of our psychotherapy training was based on making stuff up, and whoever could make up the best sounding stuff, according to the theory of the day, would consider therapists as engaging in clinical thinking. It wasn't clinical thinking at all. It was just making stuff up. Yeah. And of course, projection. So in a way, in our training, we were just getting better at projecting rather than engaging in clinical thought. So in other words, there's crazy things in our training. First of all, we don't see the relationship between theory and practice. You're not told how people would think or analyze a particular session and how it would lead to effective action. Oftentimes, you're really not taught clinical thinking. You're taught how to project. And so we have the disaster situation, in my opinion. It's like take diagnosis. Like you're always taught diagnosis is so important, right? Yeah, here's an interesting thing. If you go to the doctor, you have a temperature, the doctor's not going to say, well, your diagnosis is you have a temperature. You're going to say to the doctor, "Doctor, I knew I had a temperature, but I wanted to know what's causing it." He says, "Oh, you wanted a diagnosis. You want to know what the illness is that causes the symptom. Yes, doctor. Oh, okay. Well, let's do some research here to figure that out. Psychotherapy, we actually don't diagnose patients. We have things that are called diagnoses, but they're temperatures, like depression, anxiety, right? So everyone's supposed to be so ecstatic. Oh, so you were able to give the patient a label for a symptom. Okay, so he has depression, or he has anxiety, he has panic attacks, or he has a collection of symptoms. But the problem is, it doesn't tell you how to treat the patient. Right? Because it's like in medicine, it's not enough to say what the symptom is. You want to know what causes the symptoms because you're going to treat the cause. Yeah. So that's an interesting thing. We say we diagnose. Actually, we don't. And so as a result, students think they diagnose a patient. No, they just listed symptoms. They haven't done the clinical thinking, haven't been taught to do the clinical thinking that would let you know what caused the symptoms. So we're going to look at every patient response. Okay, did they use a feeling, anxiety defense? After 20 responses, what were the 20 defenses the patient used? How would those defenses create the presenting problems the patient has? Okay, now we know which resistance system is causing it. We know which resistance system to treat. We know how much anxiety and feeling the patient can tolerate. We have a reasonable treatment plan. But students aren't really taught even just a very simple thing of just how to diagnose.
Yeah. Really interesting thought you have there on like the difference between a medical model or also like a psychoanalytic model of diagnosis and more, as I understand it, like a process-based.
Well, even in medicine, if someone has a symptom, they want to know what's the medical cause. Yeah. Here, we have a psychological problem. We want to know what's the psychological cause. In a sense, it's really just thinking scientifically. Thinking about causality. If you took your car to the shop and you say the mechanic's going to ask what's going wrong with your car, he hears a symptom, then he's going to go looking into your car to figure out what causes that symptom in your car. I mean, it's really kind of a simple thinking about causality in any field. Yeah. And we don't do it in our field.
No, I think it's a big misconception of diagnosis today that, you're depressed. Depression is the cause. But no, the depression is just a description of your symptoms.
Yep. And we want to know what causes those symptoms so we know what to treat.
Yeah. Okay, so when you started this therapist career, you had a different teaching than your previous ones. Did you have you had a lot of concerns, I imagine, when you started your career as a therapist, when you were supposed to go out and meet patients. You said you were supposed to meet the patients with hallucinations and stuff. And you weren't prepared. How did you calm yourself in that place?
I basically remained perpetually freaked out.
That seems reasonable.
I mean, I was just constantly anxious, and I was really surprised because a lot of people I talked to seemed very comfortable, like they just felt like it was just all working well. And I thought, it must be something wrong with me because I'm just scared to death. It's like these patients are really, and I felt terrible. I was hearing how these patients were suffering in really terrible ways, and I didn't know how to relieve their suffering, And then, people could see I was smart, so they assumed since I was smart, I must be a good therapist. It's really not true. You can be smart doesn't mean you're good. Just being smart doesn't mean you actually know what to do. Yeah. It's two different things. Yeah. And so I just felt perpetually anxious. So the way I was dealing with it was I always had some individual supervision. I was always paying for individual supervision. I was going into trainings all the time. I was reading hundreds and hundreds of books, trying to figure out what, and of course the problem is I read these books, but I never know what did they actually do. Now, of course, in reading the books, I was learning to understand certain kinds of conflicts. I was learning to understand kinds of issues more. And then over time was learning certain techniques that would help me until they didn't help me. So I was, putting together kind of a mosaic of skills where I could do this or I could do that. And then the problem was too is that every skill works until it doesn't. And so I was having to learn what works where and what doesn't, and so it was really an anxiety-provoking experience for me. I just felt terrible that I wasn't able to help patients more and help them be, just help patients more. And I thought that I secretly thought I must be, since other people are not saying this, I thought it must be me. That kind of deep insight when you're kind of a depressive. And it must be me. I must not be good as other people. Other people can do this. I can't. Maybe it's something just about me as a person that I'm just not naturally some really cool, always effective therapist, right? Because I had this secret fantasy that my teachers and all these other people were just succeeding all the time. Because I'd hear people are always talking about how successful they were with all these patients. And I thought, oh my God, I should crawl in a hole and not ever give a report on what's happening in my cases, And this is where I've got lots of training, right? And I'm getting lots of supervision stuff. And I could never claim that I was succeeding all the time. And I secretly thought I must suck, Because like in music, once you're really skilled, you're hitting 99 and 99% of the notes. I mean, you're very accurate. And I was hoping that, it took about 10 years of intense practice to really get accurate as a musician and make beautiful music. I thought, okay, well, after 10 years, I should be really cool as a therapist. And at 10 years, it hadn't happened.
Aww.
I was really kind of depressed, thinking, God, man, what is going on here? This is so much harder than I ever imagined it was going to be. So it was some years before I had the benefit of reading the right research. So here's the research. Okay. It turns out that on average, only about 50% of patients benefit from therapy, and 50% of those relapse. And that's across all therapies, okay? Wow, okay, I'm already starting to feel better. And then I read this thing of Kernberg's where he's saying that with borderline patients, yes, it's very helpful. Up to 40% of borderline patients benefit from therapy. And I thought, I wish I'd known this years before. I was reading these books about borderlines, and everybody sounds like they're just so smart and so on top of things. And I'm thinking, wow, my success rate here is really so far below 100%. And I said, 40%. Oh, man, I wish I'd known that.
Yeah, that's high.
That would have really helped me to know that. I mean, this is with the very best people in the world, right? They get 40%. I think, okay, well, there's room for little old Frederickson here. Then interesting research. I learned that that what they find so far is that psychotherapy training has not been found to increase patient outcome. And I thought, that's certainly my experience. Then another research thing came out in 2012. Said they discovered that 93% of supervision is inadequate and 35% is harmful.
35%?
Is harmful.
Yeah, that's a lot. Yeah.
And I thought, okay, that explains something here too.
Yeah.
Then, dig this. On average, therapists become worse over the course of their careers. And I thought to myself, that explains some things I've seen. And so then I began to realize, well, this begins to make sense, right? Because I was trained in two traditions where you learn specific skills. And by and large, my psychotherapy training never taught specific skills. I taught specific skills even when I was doing psychoanalytic training. And so psychoanalytic students then, at least under my training, really learned how to do defense analysis. They really learned how to do transference analysis. Now, those aren't the only two skills a therapist should have, but they're really good ones to have, no matter what kind of therapy you do. And it really became clear to me through my own experience teaching and supervising and through my own struggles how we really need to change the whole vision of what psychotherapy teaching is and training. That it needs to be focused on how theory translates into practice. And that every time you teach in theory, students should be learning a skill that embodies that theory, you know. And the other thing too is that when you intervene, the skills we develop as therapists, and when we use those skills, it involves us as persons, so that our training inherently has to involve our personal development, our affect tolerance, our awareness of our own anxiety, that it has to be both a professional and a personal training that integrates both. And unfortunately, that's by and large ignored in our field. Most therapists don't go into therapy, and a lot of times their therapy is kind of a crappy therapy. And also that in their supervision, it tends to be very intellectual, so therapists aren't really being helped with their countertransference. They're not being helped to develop the affect tolerance they need. You know, just yesterday, I was in a training group where there's a young therapist, and she had a patient who was always talking over her. Now, she could say, do you notice how you talk, and then you talk over her, right? You can't just intervene. You have to have some persistence and stamina to address a dominating patient while remaining calm. So I had to teach her what to say, and then I had to pretend I was a very dominating, borderline, difficult, bullying patient. And she sighed, and she had to take her sweater off. She was getting so hot. And then I had her stand up and say it to me. I had her put her hands around my neck as she was saying this to me, right? And she was feeling more and more feelings as she did this. But now she could tolerate those feelings and say what she needed to say to a difficult patient, right? She could have read the intervention in a book. It wouldn't have done any good. Because she wouldn't have the affect tolerance she needed to develop to put that skill into effect.
Yeah, it sounds like a really creative way of working with countertransference in therapists, and I wish that I had the same training.
Yeah, because I think, you know, most psychotherapy is really teaching therapists how to, training is teaching therapists how to intellectualize. It doesn't really help anybody. You know, we can all learn to intellectualize about patients. Usually we've already done it already before we entered psychotherapy training. So the thing is that we're really not taught how to think scientifically about our patients, how to think scientifically about our sessions, so that we can form reasonable hypotheses, test them out through an intervention, and see patient response. Another problem in our training field is that since we never see really good clinicians, we never see our own work, we can't really learn from the best clinicians. Like in music, everybody can watch and listen to the very best musicians in the world. You've got a lot of recordings, and you can listen to them again and again and again, and you realize, wow, that's possible. I want to know how they do it, right? And the therapists never have a chance to really observe their own work. You know, like when I was a musician, you record yourself. Because when you record yourself, you hear things you didn't hear when you practiced. You realize, oh, wow, I'm out of tune on that. Oh, wow, that high C sharp's a little flat. Oh, wow, my rhythm is incorrect there on the dotted 8/16. And you're going to play again and again and again. Listen to your recording until it's just absolutely so. Yeah. People don't know that about music. But yeah, we record ourselves and we listen to the recording. Like last Christmas, we have a bunch of friends. We get together and we were singing some Bach cantata. So I was going to sing a little solo in the midst of this Bach cantata. You can bet I've had my iPhone recording that sucker. And I played that again and again and again because I thought, oh, hey, I sound pretty good, right? The usual delusion. And then I listened and I thought, oh, my God. Okay. So it's great you're recording. Are you videotaping?
Yeah, we are. It's
marvelous.
Mentoring.
Now, here's another piece of research. If you videotape, your outcome will be better, even if you don't look at the videotape.
All right.
That we don't know why, but just videotaping your work is better. You're somehow going to be just a little bit more self-conscious, and the work's going to be better. If you analyze your videotape, or just if you even just watch your videotape, your work will get better, even without supervision. If you just watch it, it'll get better.
Yeah.
So this is fast.
Self-supervision, or
yeah.
What do you think the processes underlying this improvement?
Well, of course, as you know, on my website, icbinstitute.com, I have an article I've written on self-supervision, because therapists aren't really taught how to practice.
No.
Like in music, you're taught how to practice. You probably didn't know that, but really great musicians are taught how to practice. And sometimes, like my wife's a professional musician, for several summers, she went to a master class. The only thing they were taught was how to practice. These are professional musicians who wanted to take their work up to another level, and they're wondering, how can I refine the way I practice? So it's very systematic about how you practice. Psychotherapy, we have no training. And how do you do practice? How do you do self-study?
Because that would be very helpful to have that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because in music, it's not just the amount of practice that you do. Because there's some people that practice a lot, it doesn't no good. You know, if you just practice a piece you like to play all the time, yeah, you probably get a little better at that piece. Actually, it doesn't make you more skilled. So a good teacher sees which foundational skills need to get built first, and then he'll build other skills later. But he can identify which skills you need to work on and in what order. And he starts you on those foundational skills, and he gives you certain exercises. He teaches you how to practice those exercises, and he'll listen to you practice a little bit just to get a sense of how you need to learn how to practice. I had a teacher, for example, when I was learning how to practice. He had a very good book. And from his book, I learned how to practice. Oh, I should warm up for 20 minutes a day. I should work on this kind of exercise 20 minutes a day. I should work on this. I should work on my solo for a half hour a day. And then I should do this. And at the end of the day, I should do this kind of exercise. But he actually had a plan for how you divide up your practice during the day to make sure that you're addressing that complex set of skills you need. So the thing is, again, if you have a systematic way of practicing, yes, your deliberate practice will really pay off. So that's what we have to develop in therapy.
Yeah.
So in my article on deliberate practice, I think it's called self-supervision. It gives like probably 15 different ways you can look at a videotape and analyze it in order to improve your outcome. Because a lot of times the thing is, you see your teacher, if you're lucky and you have individual supervision, or in your music you have a music teacher, you see your teacher only once a week for an hour.
Mm-hmm.
So the other days of the week, the self-supervision is all up to you. So you need certain kind of things that help you learn how to supervise yourself. For example, like one of the most simple ones is I say to students, okay, transcribe the first 5 minutes of your case. So whatever you did, just transcribe the first 5 minutes, and then take every sentence of yours and analyze, was I exploring a feeling? Was I regulating anxiety? Was I addressing a defense? Or was I cognizing?
Yeah.
And what we find is we really love to hear our thoughts. But the greater percentage of your comments that are cognizing, the less exploration is going on. Yeah. So if you can just see what your percentage is, okay, I was exploring feelings like only 5% of the time, and I was cognizing 50% of the time, I already know something I can do next week. I'll cognize less and ask for feelings more, you know? And the next week, your percentage is already better, and the case is more focused. So there's like, I think like 15, just as a sampling, like 15 different things that you can do analyzing your video without a supervisor even with you, that allows you, like every day, you have 5-10 minutes or an hour, okay, what can I do to study my videotape? The other thing too is we're just given the idea that if you just do therapy, you'll get better. But the research shows if you just do therapy, you get worse. You see that music too. People who don't take music lessons, yeah, they don't become better. They stay about the same, but they actually don't get better. So same thing here, unless you do, that kind of self-study on a regular basis, yeah, most likely your skill level is not going to rise.
That's interesting. That's really interesting.
Yeah, because therapists say, oh man, but it's hard for me to set aside the time. I say, oh, absolutely. Every chess player will tell you it's difficult to set aside the time. Every musician will tell you it's really difficult to set aside the time, right? A ballerina will tell you, yeah, it's really hard. Do I really want to do this physically difficult move 10 more times today? No, but I will because it helps me, right? So in a way, to become really good at being a therapist takes a lot of persistence. Just like in music or ballet or chess, you have to understand that you're doing something in part as a science, but also really as an art and craft. And it's really a matter to hone your skill levels up. You have to practice certain skills in a deliberate fashion and in a stepwise manner.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen that with students. I've seen definitely those who practice my skill building exercises, their effectiveness really goes up. There's just no question. And we're doing research trying to develop that. But I can tell you, like, one research paper we're putting out there, and hopefully get published soon, but we did a drug rehab facility based on ISTDP. And these were it was an inpatient facility for 30 days. And the therapists were all drug counselors. They were kind of doing therapy, but had never been taught in any systematic way. So I met with them for 5 days, and they learned 18 skill building exercises that I thought would be the most important skill building exercises with fragile drug addicts. And the whole thing was, all we're going to do is teach them skills to help build a therapeutic alliance, regulate anxiety, and deactivate projections. That's it. And then they had weekly supervision with me or a colleague by Skype. It was group supervision for an hour a week. And then each week for another hour, they do a skill building exercise. So, and the project, unfortunately, lasted 10 weeks because the funding fell through. Oh. So they learned 28 skills. Well, they learned 28 skills, and they had 10 hours of supervision. Okay, during that time, the dropout rate in their facility dropped almost 50%. The control group, which was treatment as usual, of their patients that they treated at 6 months, only 17% were sober. And in our group, 48.8% of the patients were sober. So it gives you a sense of how very specific skill building exercises can lead to a fairly quick change in effectiveness. Now, were 100% of the patients sober? No, but we're a lot more. So absolutely, it's really terrific, and we'll see what happens. We have another research project right now. Yeah. Same thing with the students, the therapists. In this case, they're trained therapists, so they're psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers. So the trained therapists, weekly supervision, they do a skill building exercise every week, and we are able to continue for like several years. Now, in that case, our results are even better. Mm-hmm. So it goes to show that specific skills, I think, lead to specific results. And it would make sense, given that that's consistent with all the other crafts and arts that we see.
Yeah, it's really reasonable when you think about it like that.
Yeah, I mean, if you knew someone was not a skillful therapist and someone was a skillful therapist, you're going to go to a skillful therapist.
Yeah. Of course.
Here's another thing, although I talk about ICD a lot, I don't really talk about it much, really, because it really doesn't matter what the model of therapy is, you do. That the differences of effectiveness between treatment models is actually not that great. When we look at the outcome, I mean, it's true with cognitive therapy, they're still starting with a big relapse rate, okay? But still, when you look at the initial results of effectiveness of therapy, results between models as a whole is not all that huge. What's huge is the differences between clinicians in any model.
Yeah.
Within every model, there are really effective therapists and really bad therapists.
Yeah, of course.
So whether it's cognitive therapy, psychoanalysis, ICD, whatever, if you want to find a good bad therapist, you can. Right? So we begin to see that while I think this is a useful model I teach, I think that still, regardless of the model, the key difference we're still seeing is between clinicians, which suggests that skill is probably the factor we should be focusing on.
Yeah. It's really reasonable.
Yeah.
And that we know that when we look at results, the top 20% of therapists in any model are getting most of the good results.
Yeah.
And you have a subset of therapists within every model who are getting most of the bad results.
So practice
so
is really the key thing.
Really underscores the issue of skill.
Yeah. It's very, very, very nice points you make, and the importance of practicing and continue practicing all the time. But I think, how do you balance that with, I think, especially for maybe beginning therapists, or the performance anxiety that comes with this kind of work, and the urge to want to help, and how do we balance that with like the need to constantly practice? What do you think?
Well, increased practice leads to increased effectiveness, which leads to dropped anxiety.
Okay.
You know, the more situations you find you're able to handle well, the less anxious you're going to be. I mean, if you don't know what to do, you're going to be anxious.
Of course.
I mean, I thought, when I started out as a therapist, I was terribly anxious. And later I had therapists coming in, oh, God, I'm so anxious. I don't know what to do. Because I'd be teaching beginning therapists. And I said, well, that's a sign of health. Of course you're anxious. You don't know what to do. That's why you're here. My job is to teach you what to do so you don't have to be so anxious.
Okay, so we can have a little bit of compassion with ourselves.
Absolutely. And it's my job, right? It's my job as a teacher to teach you what to do so you can be more effective. You should be anxious. You don't know what to do, of course. Yes. And it's my job to teach you so you can be more effective. So I think that's also another thing is, since I come at this from a craft perspective, I just assume it's my job to teach you to be more skilled. So that you're not so anxious. It's not my job to reassure you, oh, you'll get much better, or it won't be so bad. It just takes time. No, it makes sense you're anxious. So let's develop your skills. Let's see if we can teach you this skill this week so that you'll be more effective with that patient. And next week we're going to work on another skill. And here's, it's like, when I do core trainings, all the students have to do one of my skill building exercises, which is for just developing alliance, so that they learn like 18 skills that they practice, like learning the language. And they learn 18 skills before they even see me. It's just for them to really get immersed in them.
So before they see you, you hand out like skill building exercises, or
Yeah. So on my websites, I have one called iscbinstitute.com, and another one's called Deliberate Practice in Psychotherapy.com. And on them, I have these skill building exercises that you can download. It's like if you're going to download a program to teach you how to learn Italian or learn Spanish. Here, you learn psychotherapy. So then they when they join my training, they learn these 18 skills before they even see me. And then each time we meet in a core training, then I have certain skill building studies we do every time we meet. So every time they're learning theory, but they're learning certain skills, so that it's like the training is not just how to think. It's like, these are the skills you need to learn. So it's just very concrete. Because to me, I want people to feel less anxious. I want them to feel more confident. But to feel confident, you have to be effective. See, a lot of the literature is trying to focus on whether therapists feel confident. Confidence has no relationship to effectiveness. Right? If you're not so confident, chances are you're aware, gosh, something's not working with this patient. I need to study this videotape. I've been practicing 35 years. I still have sessions that aren't going the way I want them, and I'm going to study that videotape afterwards. What can I learn from here? What do I need to do differently? So problem is, confidence could just mean that you're grandiose. Doesn't necessarily mean you have skills. That's why I'm always trying to instill confidence really through skill. Because when you look at if you look at a master musician, master chess player, master carpenter, they're confident, but they're confident because they're good.
This is very, very interesting. But time flies when you're having fun. I think we have to round this up a bit. If you could go back to when you were a beginning therapist and say something to yourself that would ease your anxiety, or maybe not, or if you have some advice for us, just some last words that we can take with us.
To ease anxiety, I would say just accept that anxiety as a beginning therapist is a sign of sanity.
Yeah.
Of course, you're anxious. And they would never ask a medical student to go in and do heart surgery in the first week of medical school.
No.
But we ask therapists to do that all the time. And so naturally, you are very anxious because you're being asked to do things no one would ever do in any other field. You don't have the skills. You're being asked to do something you can't do. And so just accept that you're not able to do it and that you're going to be nervous for a while. Get the best supervision you can get. Do skill building exercises so you get the skills you need. And over time, you'll become a more skilled therapist. Our field is organized in a way it's crazy. It is crazy. That's why it feels crazy. Yeah, and hopefully we'll change it over the future. But right now, yes, it's no medical student would be doing open heart surgery in week 1. Yeah, and that's what you're doing. That's why you're anxious. This is a sign of sanity. Yeah, and talk to your friends. Talk to your other therapist friends so that you're not alone with this.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's very solid advice.
Yeah. So thank you very much for talking with us. It was really nice to have you here. And
I've learned a lot.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I appreciate the chance to have a chance to talk to you and meet you. Thank you so much.
You take care then.
You too.
Okay. Bye, John. You're in Poland now.
I'm in Poland. Yes.
Are you coming to Sweden soon? So maybe our listeners can get a chance to listen to you live.
Let me see. I will. Let's see. This is spring. So I'll be in Sweden in the fall, and I don't know if I'm giving a talk in Stockholm or not. I just did one in Stockholm. I know that I'm in Gothenburg as well, but I don't remember if I have been giving a talk there or not. But whenever I give a talk, they can always find out from the Swedish ICD Society Facebook page. They always announce these things.
Very nice.
All right.
Great.
Nice.
Thanks
See you.
so much.
Bye, John.
Bye.
Bye-bye.